You're listening to The Truth About Bible Study taught by Pastor Dan Christians at Maple City Baptist Church in Chatham, Ontario. For more information about Maple City, please visit us online at maplecitybaptistchurch.com.
I kind of half expected there to be nobody here this morning. I don't know why, just Thanksgiving Day. I thought maybe people would just take the Sunday school off. But you didn't, most of you, and so that's good. So I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad we got to do Sunday school. And I'm glad we finally, hopefully, get to end this section of the series on the truth about, where we've been speaking for the last number of weeks about the truth about the sanctity of life, and then the last 3 weeks on the topic of suicide, assisted suicide, and euthanasia. We'll finally get into the assisted suicide and euthanasia part of it this morning. We'll finish that up, and then next week we'll start on something brand new and fresh. It'll still be in the Truth About series, but it won't be connected to the sanctity of life. So, just to let you know that. I want to say once again how thankful I am for the participation and for the honesty and for the advice that was given over the last 2 weeks. I think that what happened in the last couple of weeks in this class was something that could be really helpful for a lot of people that have struggled with and maybe will struggle with or are struggling with suicide and depression and just those difficulties. To know that there are other people that struggle and that the Lord has led through this, I think is a really helpful thing. And I think what we saw last week and the last couple of weeks has been just an example of what the church is more supposed to be, where we're able to be honest about what we've gone through and able to not just be imperfect people, but people who are saved by the grace of God and that God loves despite our imperfections. And so I'm thankful for that. And I just want to again thank you for participating. And once again, as we go through these classes, if at any point you feel the need to raise your hand and ask a question or make a point, or, I love that type of interaction. So please do that if you can. All right, let's pray, and then we'll get into our lesson. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, Lord. I thank you that you are a great God, and that you are a God who created us, who is powerful, who loves us, and who loves life. And God, I pray that as we talk about the subject of assisted suicide and euthanasia, something that's very relevant in our culture today, that you'd help us to just be wise as we think about it and to have compassion, but also be willing to speak truth and love, God. And I pray that you just guide our discussion. And we love you, Lord. We thank you, and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. I think it's important for believers today to be aware of these sanctity of life issues because they are so relevant in our society today. If you know of just the court system of the last year, how it's been dealing with the topic of euthanasia and assisted suicide, or specifically assisted suicide, and how that's been something that's been going on in the courts for a couple years now, and finally came to head this past June, and assisted suicide was legalized in Canada. So what I want to do again is just remind you of what the definitions of assisted suicide and euthanasia are, and then discuss some of the issues that surround this and how we as Christians can best represent the truth that's presented in the Scripture in a way that is loving and kind. So what is assisted suicide? Assisted suicide is the suicide of a patient suffering from an incurable disease affected by the taking of lethal drugs provided by a doctor for this purpose. Okay, so it is essentially the doctor prescribing something that the person will then take, consume, that will end their lives. Euthanasia is the killing of a patient suffering from an incurable and painful disease or an irreversible coma by the injecting of lethal drugs by a doctor. At least that would be active euthanasia. And so the difference there being who is holding the syringe. Okay, is it the patient that's putting the drugs in their own system, or is it the doctor doing that for them? I don't see a meaningful difference when it comes to those two things, euthanasia and assisted suicide, when we're dealing with the issue of in both cases, the person being euthanized or committing suicide has given consent. Okay, so there's not really a difference whether if I say, yes, doctor, kill me, and then I put up my arm and then they do it, or I'm able to grab it. I don't think that there's a real difference there. I think, though, when we're talking about this issue, understanding that legalizing euthanasia, which is not legal in Canada now, but legalizing the ability for the doctor to kill a patient is something that could very easily lead to doctors killing patients without consent, doctors killing patients with the consent of this person or this person. And we'll talk about how that's happened in other countries in just a few moments. But I just want to kind of make that distinction right away that really it doesn't matter who is doing the injecting if there's consent. So As of June 2016, human euthanasia is legal in the Netherlands, Belgium, Colombia, and Luxembourg. So to euthanize, for the doctor to actually commit the act of killing the patient, is legal in the Netherlands, Belgium, Colombia, and Luxembourg, which is a small number of countries throughout the world. In December of 2013, the Belgian Senate just voted in favor of extending euthanasia to terminally ill children. So now in Belgium, you can actually euthanize your child if they're terminally ill. And I think the first Belgian child was supposed to be euthanized just this past September. So I didn't actually hear whether that happened or not, but that was the plan. Assisted suicide is legal in Switzerland, Germany, Japan, Canada, and in 5 U.S. states: Washington, Oregon, Vermont, Montana, and California. It's also legal in 1 county in New Mexico. At this moment, all euthanasia is illegal in Canada, but assisted suicide, on a very specific definition, is legal in Canada. This was Bill C-14 that's passed on June 16, 2016. It's called the Medical Assistance in Dying Bill, or the Death with Dignity Bill. So I want to give you just the parameters that were set out by the Canadian government when they legalized this, because there was a lot of controversy within the Senate and within the House over what the parameters should be. And it'll surprise you what the controversy was when we discuss it. But this is the parameter. So if you want to have a doctor end your life in Canada, it says, first of all, a person may receive medical assistance in dying only if they meet the following criteria. 1, they're eligible for OHIP. So for OHIP or for any type of program in Canada that is to take care of your health care. And so if you are not a citizen of Canada, or if you're not a landed resident in Canada, then you are not eligible to have a doctor kill you. Number 2, they are at least 18 years of age and capable of making decisions with respect to their health. So somebody has to be 18 years old and sane. Number 3, they have to have a grievous irremediable medical condition. So a person has to have a very serious medical condition and a medical condition that cannot be reversed. Number 4, they give informed consent to receive medical assistance in dying after having been informed of the means that are available to relieve their suffering, including palliative care. So the person has to understand that there are other options to relieve their suffering. And when they've gone through all of those options and say all of those options are insufficient, and I still would like to end my own life, then a person that's 18 years or older and has a serious disease that is irremediable is able to commit suicide with the help of the doctor. Now, this is where the controversy comes. It says a person has a grievous and irremediable medical condition only if they meet the following criteria. And so there's a huge discussion over what criteria they had to meet in order to qualify for that condition. A, they have a serious and incurable disease or a disability. B, they are in an advanced state of irreversible decline in capability. C, that illness, disease, or disability, or that state of decline causes them enduring physical or psychological suffering that is intolerable to them and cannot be relieved under conditions that they consider acceptable. So recognize that within that statement, it leaves it very open to the patient, right? They have a physical or psychological suffering that is intolerable to them, and that they have determined that the conditions to live under at this point are unacceptable. So that's where it's all about them. But this last one, D, is the phrase that was under great controversy. It is that their natural death has become reasonably foreseeable, taking into account all of their medical circumstances without a prognosis necessarily having been made as to the specific length of time that they have remaining. So it's saying that the doctor doesn't have to be able to give you the number of days you have remaining, but the doctor does have to say that your death will be in the reasonable, foreseeable future. Now, this is under great controversy. And do you want to know why it was under great controversy? Because there was a huge number of people that wanted that stricken from the qualifications. They said, I don't understand why somebody's death has to be in the reasonable foreseeable future in order to put them to death. If they have these other things, which are they have an incurable disease, they are losing capability, and that their suffering is intolerable for them, if they meet those criteria, then why do we say they have to also be close to death? And that was the big controversy. And there's a lot of people that are really upset with the bill the way it was passed, and it was seen as kind of a compromise because they thought that letter D should be completely taken out of the qualifications that define what a grievous and irremediable medical condition is. And so here for the Christian is the moral dilemma. We've said that we are pro-life from the womb to the tomb, right? We believe in the sanctity of human life. But this particular issue garners a number of supporters from the side that are traditionally pro-life. The thought is, these people we're talking about are going to die anyway. It's always a good thing to end suffering, right? We end the suffering of animals when they're in pain. People should have the choice whether they live or die. And when you say those things to a lot of people, a lot of Christians say, yeah, okay, that makes sense. The person's going to die anyway. Why would we not want to relieve their suffering? Right? Why would we not want to give them the choice to die the way that they want to die when their death is imminent anyway? Once again, the Bible does not specifically mention the term abortion or euthanasia. Right? And so in both cases, what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, here are the biblical principles that God has given us that surround life and the sanctity of human life, and to determine whether or not those are sufficient to make a case for committing euthanasia or for opposing euthanasia and assisted suicide. So that's kind of what I want to do for part of our time this morning. Before we get to that, I want to explain to you the different types of euthanasia once again and different types of assisted suicide so that we're very clear on what we're talking about. My thought is, or my goal is, that in this class, you all are going to, this is an issue today in Canada. This is something that's discussed and debated today in Canada. This is not one that's going to go away. There's a lot of people that aren't happy with the bill the way it was passed, and it's something that will be attempted to be changed in the future. And so I think as Christians, it's good for us to be ready to give an answer for what we believe in this area, and to be aware of the different issues. And so that's what I'm hoping for this morning. And so just understand that there are different types of euthanasia. We said this last week. There's active euthanasia, where the doctor is actively inserting something or giving some type of drug that they know is going to kill the patient. There's also unnatural passive euthanasia, where the doctor is removing something that is absolutely required and normal for human life. So if they were to remove air from the room, that would be passive. So unnatural passive. So, okay, they didn't actually inject anything in the arm, but they removed air, or they removed food, or they removed water, or they remove something that is just every single person needs to live. That would be unnatural passive euthanasia. And then there's also passive euthanasia, which is the doctor removing some type of device that is keeping that person alive. So that is performing a function that is not natural for a piece of medical equipment to perform. So if it's beating the heart, or if it's life support, or something along those lines, if you were to remove that and allow the person to die, that would be natural passive euthanasia. Along the same lines, we have assisted suicide. We have active assisted suicide, where a person capable of making a choice to end their life, but requires a physician to assist them in the process. The physician would prescribe medication that they would take that would actively end their life. Okay? There is, as far as I know, I can't understand why we'd have something like unnatural passive assisted suicide. Because when you think of that, that means that the person is going to put themselves through a great deal of suffering in order to end their suffering, right? So a person would not choose not to eat or have water to drink. If they're able to have a doctor prescribe them a pill, they'd much rather take the pill and avoid the suffering that would be caused by unnaturally removing something that's normal for living. Then you might have natural passive assisted suicide, but when you think about what natural passive assisted suicide is simply you're removing something, you're choosing to remove something that's keeping you alive. And so I don't know if you'd consider that suicide, or if you just say that's allowing your body to die. And so I kind of would want to categorize that more under you just allowed your body to die and you haven't actually committed suicide. Your body is dying. And you've just allowed that process to go. You haven't forced medical equipment to keep your heart beating for an extended time. And so here are the arguments for active. And this is what I wanted to do. I wanted us to think, because it's really helpful when you're in any kind of discussion, to say, okay, what is the other person's perspective? A lot of times what happens anytime we talk with people is that we are so bent on trying to help them recognize the truth, which is the truth is always the way we see it. We have our perspective so clearly that we aren't willing to come on the other side of the issue and say, okay, I might not agree with what they think, but let me try and figure out what it is they actually think. Let me try and see this thing from their perspective. And so I thought it might be good for us this morning to say, what are some of the reasons that assisted suicide and euthanasia could be seen as beneficial to a lot of people? Okay? Now, if you give an answer, I'm not going to assume that you agree with assisted suicide or euthanasia, but I want you to think for a second why people are for this. I mean, why are people making a big deal of this? Pastor?
To end suffering. It's a terrible thing to watch your loved one suffer in such an agonizing way. So that would be, I think, one of the biggest reasons.
Yep. To end suffering. Absolutely. You don't want to see, you don't want to suffer. You don't want to see a loved one suffer. Okay, Michelle.
Just to have control.
Okay. Yeah. People want to have control. They don't want to feel like the disease is taking control of them. Yep.
Would it be someone doesn't have the means to pay for treatment for the disease?
Okay. Absolutely. So that's a great point, Danielle. When you're thinking about this person who you know is in terrible suffering, and you know that these doctor bills are racking up, and you're spending all of this money to keep this person alive, or to maybe limit their suffering, or to treat them as best as you can, knowing that there really is, this is just prolonging suffering, all of this spending of money. And so you might think, you know what, just take a pill, end the suffering, and save a little bit of money in the process. It sounds really bad, but the truth is, and let's be really honest about this. The truth is, if there was more money in Canada, then people would receive better medical care, right? So it might save people who could be saved, right? There are some good arguments for this, right? And we're talking about like a very wealthy country like Canada. So when you bring this issue to another country, who there are a lot of people dying of things that could be treated and cured, except they don't have the money, maybe because they're keeping people who are wealthy alive for extended times that are suffering, right? So there are good arguments. I want you to see that, okay? What else? Steve?
Well, when my mother-in-law was dying, we had a family meeting, and the doctor said he wasn't going to extend her life because she wasn't going to make it anyway. But he did say they were going to make her suffering as light as possible. Mm-hmm. So if you're dying, I guess they make the suffering as light as possible with the drugs they put in them.
Yep.
So when they remove, or when they don't have life-giving support, they remove that, they could still live for a week, okay? That's what happened to my mother-in-law.
Yep. Yep. It happens to a lot of people. It's amazing that some people you see and you think they're at the point of death, and they stay there for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. In other people, it's like just all of a sudden, you didn't expect it. They're gone.
But it's hard to see.
Yep. Yeah. Very hard to see. Yep.
When I was in a nursing home, this dear lady was not even so nervous, speaking to her so well in 1980s, and she decided that she was going to end her life by not eating and drinking. And what they didn't understand in the family, which I tried to have a little bit chance to say, is that it's worse to stop eating and drinking. You suffer more like that. And they don't understand that. Is to watch someone die with no water, no food is worse. Mm-hmm. So I guess there's that point.
Yeah.
That's not a good suicide.
Yeah, so you almost think if somebody's going to go to the lengths to put them through that kind of suffering, then couldn't we do something to make it easier on them?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Paul?
I've heard older people say, I don't want to be a burden to my family.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so just to not be a burden,
mm-hmm.
they'll end their life.
Yeah. I think some of it really is, these people are putting their lives on hold for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or, a month at a time, and they're coming to have to see me every day, and I don't want to be this burden constantly on people. And so ending their life seems better. Beth?
They don't want to be a burden, but they're just waiting for their loved one to say, "You're not a burden. You looked after me when I was growing up. I'm here for you." That's what you need to do.
Yep. You're absolutely right.
You need that reassurance.
That's good. Jen?
My oldest husband.
Yeah, there's actually a story in Belgium where a couple applied to commit suicide together because they knew that if one of them was to die, then the other one would be so lonely. And that was psychological suffering that they weren't willing to go through. And so they said, instead of ever going through that, we want to commit suicide at the same time together. And we want a doctor to help us.
A lot of times in the hospital, doctors, when they, like Steve said, they're going to ease the pain.
Yep.
Well, a lot of times they give them morphine. When they start pumping morphine in you, you're just about on your last leg. So that's what they give you, that little bit of the... But they say that they're giving you morphine to kill the pain. How do they know you got pain? They're just giving you morphine so you will...
Pass more quickly.
So you will go away.
Yep. Could be.
So is that assisted?
Well, I think if the doctor was purposefully doing that, then yes. I think, though, that would have to depend on intent, and I don't know enough about morphine and what it does to say whether or not that would actually for sure cause that. Beth?
But they usually ask the family.
Yep.
And they'll explain that. This will make the person go faster. Are you willing to have this administered?
Yep. Yeah, and what I think is important to understand, too, is that within this topic, so we've been talking about legalizing assisted suicide, where now a physician can actually prescribe a pill that will immediately end the person's life. But the practice of having suffering shortened via morphine or something else, I mean, that's been going on for a long time. What we've done is just one more step where we've said now it's actually legal to, rather than having to up the morphine, let's just give them the pill or put it in their drip bag and let them go to sleep quietly, right? So that's kind of the difference. And okay, is there any other thoughts? When I was thinking about the arguments for active assisted suicide or euthanasia, I thought you have the individual perspective where that person personally wants their suffering ended, they want to go out on their own terms, and they want to be remembered for who they are. And we've said also they don't want to feel like they're a burden any longer on society or the family. The familial perspective, the family no longer wants to watch them suffer. They want to say goodbye before the disease takes over. And we've seen that before where you've had a loved one where at one point, if you could just stop there, the memory of them is very good. But then as their disease progresses, it seems like their personality changes somewhat, and you just remember different things, and they just want to be able to say, I want to remember my loved one this way, and I want to end it at this time. They want to relieve the family of economic burden and ensure that the inheritance is not spent keeping someone alive who wants to die anyway. And then the societal perspective we talked about, it's huge healthcare savings. It will open hospital beds. It will make doctors more available. And so as we discuss this topic, let's be very clear that there are many, many reasons, logical reasons, why assisted suicide and euthanasia is a good, logical idea. Okay? So why should a Christian be pro-life in this area? I want to give you 3 biblical arguments against euthanasia and assisted suicide, and 3 logical arguments against assisted suicide and euthanasia. Number 1, this is the one we've kind of based this whole series on, is the sanctity of human life. I had a kid in our youth group last year who was a senior in high school, and he was doing a project in his class on this topic. And he came to me and he said, listen, I'm doing a project on this topic. There are other people doing the opposite side. And then at the end of this whole thing, we kind of do like a little debate. And I'm wondering if you can help me understand why a Christian would be against assisted suicide. And he went through this whole gamut of look at it relieves suffering. And it's helpful for the family. It's helpful for society. Why would we be against something like that? And I said, biblically based almost solely on this one principle, that human life is sacred. That human life is, we're made in the image of God, that God has made us in a very, very special way, a very unique way from all of the rest of creation. And in order for us to be consistent to on our principle of the sanctity of human life, then we have to be against killing innocent people at any point. Okay? This is the way that God has set this thing up. And so the Bible does not open for us a loophole for those who are in pain or dying. As soon as we allow circumstances to change the rules in one area, we have opened up ourselves to the possibility of that happening in many areas. That's when we talked about the abortion issue, we said a lot of people like to go to that 1 or 2% where if someone was raped or if it was incest, then what do you do in that case? Well, in that case, we still have to say, is killing the child killing an innocent human being? Because if it is, then the sins of the father don't get to determine whether or not the mother has the right to kill the child or not. Right? And so it's the principle. We have to be firm on the principle. It would be easier for Christians. I've actually heard Christians say, if we would just not be so strong on that one point and allow that one area, then society would be much more willing to listen to our arguments. I just don't think we have the right to do that. I think that our whole belief is based on human life being sacred. And if at any point we say it's sacred up until X amount of suffering, or up until they're this close to death, or if they're going to bring this amount of pain or difficulty to the mother or the family, if we're going to start putting a limit, where does that end? Who gets to decide where the line is? If we've determined that human life is sacred, then it's sacred no matter what. And we don't get to make that call of it's sacred up until this amount of suffering, or up until they don't feel like they want to suffer anymore. And so it's based solely on this principle, and we can't diminish or go against the principle. Paul?
Well, I was just going to say, if we allow a sliver to open up there, sanctity of life goes, in every direction.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, racism, wherever you want to take sanctity of life is, and so where does that sliver fit there? And then,
Yep, absolutely.
It just opens it up. Really.
It does. If I was a proponent of assisted suicide and euthanasia, or a proponent of abortion, or a proponent of any of these issues we're talking about, and I was talking to a Christian who said, well, in this circumstance, it's okay, then I would say your whole argument, your whole platform was just destroyed. You now at no point have the ability to say, well, why did you just get to decide that this X amount of suffering is the line that God says now it's okay? If human life is sacred and we are not to take it, and taking human life, innocent human life, is murder, then why are at this line we're allowed to say, okay, now you can take it. Now it's your call. Now it's not. Now you don't have to leave it in God's hands, right? So that's exactly it. When we open this sliver up in one area, we allow ourselves to be open to attack in all of these areas. Now, I hope I made it abundantly clear that this is a really tough issue. And logically, it seems very clear. But biblically, Christians, I think, have to be very strong on this point simply because of the principle. We talked about the two different types of ethics, or there are many types of ethics, but really two of the big branches are teleological ethics and deontological ethics. And teleological being it's about the end or the design. So what is the end going to bring about? Well, if we start saying, well, because the end of this act will relieve suffering, because the end of this act will save money, because the end of this act will open up more beds in the hospital, when we start to say, because of what happens, the consequences of the action now make the action right, then we've moved away from deontological ethics, which is code-based, or the fact that God has given us a law, ethics that say, this is the law, keep it. No matter how it works out, no matter what the end of keeping the law is, it's just your job to obey and to do what I've said. That's what Christians should believe, because God has given us His Word. And so that's the line. And so we don't have the right to say, yes, but in this case, the end of it is beneficial. Therefore, God's law no longer applies, or God's principles no longer apply. Okay? The sanctity of human life. Number 2, God uses suffering for good. We've got to remember that. We're talking about suffering, and the goal of most people seems to immediately be to end that suffering. And if you can end suffering, then you've done a good thing. And listen, I know that Christians all over the world work to alleviate and to end suffering and to end poverty and to try and do things that are helpful for people. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all, because we're working in line with the principles God has given us to actually care for fatherless and widows and their affliction. So those things are good things. But we got to recognize that there are times that God sends suffering into people's lives, and it's for a reason. It's a good thing. One example just came to my mind. I know this isn't specifically covers all suffering, but in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11, the writer of Hebrews says, "Now no chastening for the present time seems to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby." Now here it's dealing with something that specifically God has put in the person's life to chasten them and to bring them back in line with where they should be. But the point is that going through difficulty and going through suffering and going through that trial, it's not joyous, it's not fun, it's not enjoyable, it's actually grievous. There's a lot of suffering involved. However, that suffering has a very clear purpose. And we see God having a purpose for suffering over and over again. And in this church, I've seen so many people go through suffering, and it always seems like one or two things happens. One thing happens where they are brought closer to their God, that they lean on God, that they look forward to eternity, that eternal things become more real to them, and they become more involved and more active, and like that just their faith is strengthened through the suffering. And the other avenue that some people walk down when they go through suffering is to say, no, I'm really not sure that this was for me in the first place. I really don't know if I really believed all those things that I said I believed when I wasn't suffering. And really, it's not a terrible thing to put people through and to test them that way. God does that. Okay? And it reveals hearts. And if you were to let somebody with that second kind of faith go through life thinking that they had real faith, it wouldn't be a loving thing to do. Pastor?
Dan, there's a growth in our Christian life that can only be brought about through suffering.
Mm-hmm.
There's no other way. And whether it's we suffer ourselves or we go through suffering with someone,
Yep.
there's an amazing work that happens that you cannot get any other way. It's impossible.
Yep. That's absolutely true. Steve?
I often wonder sometimes, until you stand in those shoes or lay in that bed, whether humanly speaking, your thoughts would ever change on that.
It's true. I mean, there could come to a point in my life where I say, like Job, I wish I could die. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's very possible to come. But I don't think that would change the biblical principles that I believe. And sometimes it's actually easier to see the truth and see what's right in the light. But you're right. You're right. None of us are above, it's sometimes very easy to have these lofty theological opinions on things that are morally right until we go through the situation and we say, this is really hard. But hopefully when we go through the situation, we say, but this is still right. Okay, Mom and then.
Just what you're saying is that I think that having the knowledge that we're receiving today, if we should go through that situation, we'll be able to draw on that and remember this is how we should think. And that is an incredible blessing when you're going through it. Because you're right, you are challenged with the and to be able to be brought back and say, no, this is how we should think.
Yep.
And, God is doing it for a reason, and we see the good in it.
Yep. And maybe we're having a class like this so that some of you and some of me, maybe, who will eventually be in this place can look back and say, yeah, I remember we really talked about that, and I solidified this in my heart and mind. And so even though it's hard now, I'm going to trust what was true in the light. Carolyn?
God, the Christian is both natural and spiritual, and the natural is the one that gives up easily. But when God's Spirit on the inside gives us strength in the middle of our weakness, there's nothing more beautiful to see that in another life. And probably the two people that have touched me the most, because I saw Christ in them, went through incredible suffering, where the Lord Jesus' strength in them was greater than the suffering is all, and that was on their deathbed. And Darlene Crow was one of those people. And that was supernatural. We don't get to see that every day. And if it hadn't have happened in suffering, we maybe wouldn't have seen it. Tender to those who suffer.
Absolutely. Yeah, the Crow family is not here, so we can talk about them. And really that whole situation with Darlene and the suffering that they've gone through and the suffering they're still going through has been an area where we've seen God work in the family in amazing ways. And we've seen growth, and we've seen just wonderful examples set. And so, you're right. Pastor?
was just going to say that, more in line with maybe what Steve was saying, I think we have to be careful sometimes too, because when we don't go through things, there are a flood of emotions and feelings. If you go to the Psalms, you see the psalmist struggling through these things of suffering, and acknowledging those things, and it's okay to acknowledge those things, but they come out after knowing the truth of God. They come out to the right side. But there is this process for all of us when it's really difficult, that the answers aren't as easy as we think. And we have to look to the truth that we know and work our way through that. And we see it all over Psalms. It's a great book that God has given us to view those things.
Absolutely is. In the same song, you'll have the psalmist crying out, saying, "God, this doesn't make any sense, and I just want to be done." Or and then the same, say, "But my soul is going to hope in God because He is my rock, and He is." And so it's beautiful.
Yeah, and Romans talks about that when we go through suffering, it produces endurance and character and hope. And hope doesn't put us to shame. A lot of times in suffering, we turn to shame. But it says it doesn't put us to shame because God's love is poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who He has given to us. Suffering, if we go through it with the Lord, and He pours His love into our hearts, He undergirds us and carries us.
Yep.
And, like was said, to know that, and to look for that as we go through that suffering, and to find it in the suffering is just a proof that God is carrying us.
Absolutely, it is. God working in the life of a suffering person and the strength that they receive it's amazing to see. And then just this is kind of connected with the same idea, but slightly different. And this is something that actually Dan Smollers talks about a lot. And I love when he talks about it because it's always a little bit creepy. But he talks about how in our society, we've sanitized death, right? We've made it so it was completely clean so that we have as soon as something happens where somebody dies, there's professional people wearing suits and masks that come in and clean it up before anybody can see, and then we present the body as though the person just got up and had a shower and put on makeup and that they're as alive as ever, knowing full well that they're not. And this is just makeup that they've been put on them. And so we try and make death look so sanitary in our culture, but what it does is it robs us from having to think about eternity. That is happening for everyone. Death is real, and it happens. And so it's not good for us to always be just trying to throw death as far as possible. And so this whole thing of suffering moving toward death, I think people are trying to do is they're trying to just sanitize death. It's another step of now I get to go out on my own terms, feeling as good as I can. And it's not death is the enemy, and it shouldn't be presented as anything other than the enemy, right? So that's the second reason. God uses suffering for good. Number 3, God is sovereign over life and death. We see this clearly in Scripture. Deuteronomy 32:29 says, "See now that I, even I, am He. There is no God with me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal. Neither is there any that can deliver out of my hand." So God is making it very clear that life and death is in His hand, and the ability to hurt and the ability to heal is in His hand. And as soon as you have made that choice, you've first of all taken what's in God's hand rightfully, that He is sovereign over life and death. And you've decided that it's not His to heal. Right? And there is always hope. I mean, we serve a God who could heal at any point. Okay? Now, clearly we know, and in a lot of these cases we're talking about somebody who's, say, 95 years old and has been struggling for a long time, but in any case, there is hope. And irregardless of that, life and death are in His hands, and so He chooses when it happens. Okay? 1 Samuel 2, verse 6 says, "The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down the grave and bringeth up." So, this, I think, again, is just a matter of faith. Do we trust God that in this too, in the suffering, in the difficulty, that there is good that can come from it? And I think real faith in God's sovereign rule over life and death would say, I don't understand this, but somehow it's good. Somehow it's right. And I shouldn't try and thwart what God is doing. All right? That doesn't mean that it's now the Christian's job to make sure every person who ever gets hurt gets put on life support right away. Okay? I'm not advocating. I'm actually not against passive euthanasia that's natural. We just have to understand that yes, human life is sacred, but it is for God to take it. And if God takes human life, then we don't have to force it to just the heart to keep beating when there's nobody there anymore, right? And so don't think that we're pushing so hard in the other direction that we move heaven and earth so that we can keep this heart beating. It's not like that either. It's just we don't do something that we know is going to result in the death. So we're depriving someone of food we know is going to result in their death. And so let's not deprive something of something that's very natural. But if it's something unnatural, then yeah, sure. All right? So those are my 3 biblical arguments. Here are my 3 non-biblical arguments against euthanasia. They're not unbiblical, they're non-biblical. Number 1, bravery should be applauded, not redefined. When we're talking about death here, we're talking about people suffering. We've said that to suffer courageously is a beautiful thing. And what we've done in society recently by labeling this death with dignity is saying that somebody is very dignified and courageous for making this choice to end their life. And when you think about how that's been handled in the past, we've always said that this person who has fought to the bitter end is courageous and dignified, that they've been willing to fight. And so now what do we say when we see somebody that fights and suffers and goes through a terrible time for years maybe before they finally die, as kind of everybody knew was going to happen anyway? Do we say that person no longer is dignified, that they're not courageous because they didn't choose to end their life courageously? So we're flipping the definition on its head. So now courage is ending your life. Courage is not fighting. I think courage is fighting. And so let's not take that away from people who fight.
Yeah, that has a biblical ring to it too.
Mm-hmm.
Not just logical, but that has a...
Yeah, I'm hoping, that's why I'm not saying it's not, they're non-biblical. In other words, I'm not trying to cite a passage in a verse, but they're not unbiblical. So hopefully they're in line with Scripture.
Suicide's always been the coward's way out.
Mm-hmm. Sam?
I was just going to say, if you translate that definition of courage, and it's not just, it's more than just resisting suicide, it's just ending your life or ending your being as courageous. That's problematic.
Right. Yeah, and applying that principle, across the board becomes very problematic. Yeah, you're right, Sam. And you do think you said it's in line with the Bible. You think of the way that God speaks to people. He says, you're facing unsurmountable odds. You're facing imminent suffering and torture in the future. But be strong and courageous, because as the Lord thy God is he that doth go with thee, he will never leave thee nor forsake thee. So that's you keep fighting because I'm with you. That's his idea with Israel. I don't think it doesn't apply with us. Here's what Matt Walsh said, and Matt Walsh is a blogger, and I don't always agree with everything he writes, so this is not a, yay, Matt Walsh is awesome, but he wrote this, and I thought it was good. He said, if you were saying that it's dignified and brave for a cancer patient to kill themselves, what are you saying about cancer patients who don't? What about a woman who fights to the end, survives as long as she can, and withers away slowly in agony until her very last breath escapes her lungs? Is that person not brave? Is that person not dignified? I thought we applaud that kind of person. I thought we admire her courage and tenacity. Sorry, you can't advance 2 contradictory narratives at once. If fighting cancer is brave, then it is brave precisely because she is fighting it rather than giving up and choosing death. All right, so that's number 1. Number 2, the government does not have an obligation to kill innocent people. Okay, so logically, let's think about this. We're acting as though the government needs to have this as a law, because without this as a law, it's not keeping people's rights. What you're saying is that people have a right to be killed by their government when they want to be. Right? That's not a right. Why is that a right? We have the right to live. Okay, the government protects that. We have the right to die. The government is not forcing you to stay alive. Actually, they can't do that, right? And so when it's your time to die, you will die, because you have a right to do that. But the government does not have to give us the right to be killed or to kill. That's not a basic human right. Okay? Now, the whole subject of human rights is another issue, but when we're talking about this in just purely logical terms, why would we ever think that we have a right to be killed by our government when we choose? Number 3, there is no objective way of creating moral criteria that governs who must live and who has the right to be killed. Okay, so what they're doing is now they're providing this criteria that says if you check all these boxes off, then you have the right to die, but if you miss one of the boxes, then you have the right to live. Who has the right to determine what's in those boxes? Right? Like, how are we in any way trying to come up with some type of objective moral foundation for this process, where we've determined that simply because your death isn't reasonably foreseeable, okay, this is the line that was a big controversy. So your death isn't reasonably, what is reasonably foreseeable? They won't give you a time, it's just kind of whatever the doctor decides. Well, everybody's death is reasonably foreseeable. I can reasonably foresee that all the people in this room are going to die, okay? And so what does that exactly mean? And the kicker is, what they're saying is, if you meet all of the rest of the criteria, okay, so you are in a great deal of suffering, grievous suffering, that you're going the wrong direction, that you've lost capability in yourself, that you're over 18 and you have OHIP, and you meet every other criteria, and so you are in intense, immense psychological and or physical suffering, and there's no hope of a cure, and there's no hope that you're getting better. In fact, you're only getting worse. However, your death is 3 years away and not 1, then for 3 years, we must make you suffer. Right? Where is the logic here? If the goal is to end suffering, don't you end the suffering of people who don't have their death in the foreseeable future but are going to die? That are in this type of pain that can't get out? So what I'm saying is, the whole, I mean, when we read the sentence that yes, their death has to be close, we say, oh, at least they have that. And I say, that's ridiculous. That's so illogical. It's so illogical. Now, I think that any time that somebody says we're going to protect human life, I'm happy for it. But if I'm trying to enter into their thought process and saying that our goal is to end suffering, why are we saying that we won't end the suffering of a person who is going to suffer for longer? Wouldn't it be like, if you're going to die quickly anyway, then we're not going to go through the process of giving you the drugs, right? Do you get what I'm trying to say here? So the whole point is, the logic behind it is absurd. Who has the right to decide who lives and who dies, and how is this in any way, shape, or form a logical or moral decision being made? Paul?
I have a question. What happens if somebody meets all those criteria and then, but actually then they're 18 and whatever else, and they say, but I don't want to die. I want to keep living as long as I can. I want to fight.
Yeah, so at this point, nothing would happen. They would stay alive. So this one of the criteria is they have to give their consent, and not only they have to give their consent, but they have to have been deemed by a psychiatrist that they have the ability to understand what they're saying. Right?
What is society going to look at them and say? You know, if society thinks this is the right thing,
yep.
And if an 18-year-old says, "But I don't want to do that," how are their peers going to look at him and say,
yep.
"Look at you, you're not doing the right thing.
Yep.
You shouldn't be
yep.
taking advantage of this."
Yep.
I don't know.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, and then saying that making these all these rules that are all subjective and really don't make sense. So we've determined that 18 is now the age, but in Belgium they've determined that it can be younger, and they've just applied the same principle. So if a young child understands that they're killing themselves and they won't be alive anymore, and they're going through suffering and it's incurable, et cetera, then, now you're letting a young child make that decision. Like, how is this making any sense to anybody? That's what I can't figure out. And so the logic behind it is so absurd. And you're right, you're setting people up to be looked down upon who are choosing to do what seems right. The final thing just that I want to answer to is that some people will then say, well, Christians don't care about suffering. That is not true. I love Tylenol. I'm not against ending suffering. Okay, I'm for ending suffering. And I think that the Bible, the verses that Paul actually quoted a couple of years ago about us drinking wine and strong drink, you know what? Those verses speak to this. They speak to the fact that God is actually has given ways for us to diminish or to limit this physical pain that we experience during these times. And so it's not that Christians are against it, but there are ways of limiting this type of suffering without death being the answer. And as a Christian, that's what I think you should be for. All right? So thanks, everyone. Good job. See ya. Happy Thanksgiving.